Premenstrual syndrome, PMS. What is it? What are the different types? And which one could you potentially have? Find out all about premenstrual syndrome in this episode of Well Woman. Hi, I'm Sulin Sze, and this is the Well Woman podcast. I've worked with countless women and teenage girls over the years as a natural women's health clinician, and I know how hard it can be to get the help you need to overcome hormonal imbalance, infertility, and perimenopausal symptoms. I bring together my expertise in natural medicine and nutrition with insights from experts in the field of women's wellness to help you get the information you need to make a real difference to your health. This truly unique podcast combines the wisdom of the East with the clinical know-how of modern naturopathy, offering a holistic approach to empower and inspire women just like you on the path to optimized health. I'm your trusted guide as you navigate your hormone healing journey, giving you support, accountability, and guidance along the way. Thanks for listening in, and don't forget to follow or subscribe. It's time to nourish you with Well Woman. Welcome, everybody. So nice to have you here, and I am just so excited to be able to share this information, which often is a little bit like secret women's business. And in naturopathic training, we look in depth at women's hormones, women's wellness. We learn about all the different marker chemicals and hormones that we can rely on to tell us what's happening with a woman's cycle. And today, what I'm going to, teach you is about the 5 different subtypes of premenstrual syndrome, because truth is you probably have 1, maybe 2. Some of you might even have a few of them, and rarely you might have all of them. And the reason why I think this knowledge is so important to impart is because knowledge gives you power, right? So as soon as you know which subtype of PMS you are, you can really start to tailor your diet and your herbal supplements, as well as working out any possible nutrient deficiencies, and you can get started on a protocol that works for you and your needs right now. Well, I suppose I should preface this by saying that probably 75% of my clients in clinic, and I'm an expert in women's health, so that's really where I focus, will have PMS. They will have some level of PMS, whether, sometimes they're aware of it or not, but there will be indicators that the menstrual cycle is beginning or a new menstrual cycle is beginning, and those indicators can be uncomfortable. They could be anything from recurring acne, they could be skin sensitivity, they could be abdominal pain, cramping, bloating, and distension. They can be constipation. They can be mood changes, flat mood, depression, apathy. So that's why it's so important for us to be able to know, where we stand with our PMS. And it might be different from our mothers as well. Our mothers might have experienced a type of PMS that we don't because of the environment they were growing up in, and the diet that they were eating, and the stress levels in their lives, what they were doing on a daily basis. So in fact, all of these things will affect your cycles. So what is PMS? It's premenstrual syndrome. There's another term, PMT, which is often used, which refers to premenstrual tension. So when you're looking at these two with premenstrual tension, I have to say it would be unusual if you didn't have some level of that. This tension is just part of that last phase of the cycle. In naturopathic terms, it would be the luteal phase leading into the bleed phase. And in Eastern systems, particularly Chinese traditional Chinese medicine, it's going to be the yang phase, YANG, which is ruled by progesterone. So in this phase, a certain level of tension builds up in the body because in a physical sense, your body is getting ready to shed and let go and go through a transformative process, which is releasing the endometrial lining. And the tension builds up partly because of that. But another reason that tension builds up is because you're more likely at this time to have poorer blood sugar regulation, so what you eat will affect you more intensely. You're more likely to have deficiencies in estrogen and progesterone, your key beautiful female hormones, because towards the end of the cycle, they will naturally decline and quite sharply. And physically, your body is filling up with the blood that you're about to let go. So there's a whole number of reasons why you will naturally have some level of tension before a cycle. I want you to just know that that's perfectly normal. When it comes to premenstrual syndrome, here we're talking about a syndrome, which in medical terms refers to a collection of symptoms that makes up a condition. So you need to be having a certain number of symptoms here. And it's not just a feeling of tension, underlying unease, that sort of thing that can come with PMT. It's more that you're having symptoms that are affecting your ability to enjoy your normal daily routine. So it could be issues with sleep. You might not be sleeping as well. And in that case, there could be also an interplay of some of the neurochemistry that can be affected as well. It might be that you're very distended and you've suddenly gone up a clothing size. And I don't know about you, but this was me. Every cycle, I'm now perimenopausal, but I remember in my 20s and 30s, every cycle, it seemed like I would go up a little bit in my clothing size. So there can be that sort of swelling, fluid retention. And for many women, it's going to affect their mood and their sense of well-being. And when you get all of these symptoms coming up around the same time together, it creates a cluster. And that's usually what is termed a syndrome. So premenstrual syndrome means you're at that level where it would be a pretty good idea to get some support from a naturopath like myself or from your GP if you prefer. Although the solutions given usually in the medical field, they're usually a little bit more suppressive of the hormones. It depends what you're being recommended, but they don't always address the root cause of the problem. So they're usually not enough on their own. So I'll just say that and I'll leave it at that. But with naturopaths, we definitely look at which subtype you are, what's causing these particular symptoms, and how can we then go forwards to remedy that. And PMS affects around 40% of women in their fertile years. So my reflection that around about 75% of my clients will have PMS of some sort, I actually attribute this to working with women who come in because they know they want to work on their health. So there's already a sense that something's not quite right. So they're more likely already to be presenting with PMS symptoms, but also the awareness that you develop around your body and your hormones, around all of your inner processes is incredible when you work with a naturopath, or a nutritionist in that sense, or a Chinese herbal practitioner or an acupuncturist, whatever field of complementary medicine that you're working with. When you begin to work with a practitioner, it's a learning journey. So you will start to develop this very acute sense of what's happening in your body, whether it feels like it's in harmony or not. So I would suggest that many of the women who come to see me are already quite in tune with their bodies. And so it's natural for them to be thinking, so I'm having this symptom. This is another one. What could it be? Let's dive into it. Let's work it out. And that doesn't mean that for all of you who are listening in, that does not mean that you're not in tune with your bodies. I'm just talking about my own client base and what I've experienced as a practitioner. The other thing that probably is worth mentioning is that when you start to dive into your premenstrual symptoms, again, it's a learning journey. It's a way for you to discover a lot of things about your body and your physiology, your chemistry, your neurochemistry. For example, if you are one of those women who develops low mood around the time of the cycle, or insomnia, or higher stress levels, then neurochemistry, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, noradrenaline, all of these hormones and neurotransmitters are worth looking at as well. PMS, it's a multidimensional condition, so it's a little bit different for every woman, and that is to be expected because whatever condition it is that you're presenting with, it's going to be a slightly different presentation to other women. There are a number of factors that can cause this, and this is also the reason why you might drift into one subtype of PMS rather than another. So the first one is diet. It's the easiest one to remedy. So girls, women, this is the easiest thing that you can fix today. There are certain types of diets that suit certain types of bodies, and perhaps that's a whole other episode that we can go into, but I'll just say for now that regardless of what your body type, what your issues might be with body type, weight proportions, and so on, make sure that you're getting enough protein in your diet, around about, I would say, 50 to 60% of each plate or dish that you're eating gives you some form of protein. Now, that can also be beans. It doesn't just have to be meat. It can be beans. It could be tofu, tempeh, and those sorts of things. It can be legumes, zucchini, if you love zucchini, fantastic. I get cravings for zucchini, and not just the actual zucchini fruit, because technically it's a fruit. I get cravings for the top part of the zucchini where the flower sat. That's crazy. But, I haven't quite delved into it enough, but I need to, because I need to understand what's happening in my body. So 60%, 50% protein in your meals. And then apart from that, you need a lot of fiber. And fiber is very important in terms of gastrointestinal function, but it's also very important for your hormonal levels, because fiber binds to cholesterol in the body. That's why it's so great when you have high cholesterol. But if you also have high hormone levels, a lot of those hormones, in fact, all of those hormones in your body pulsing around at the moment are built from cholesterol. So you need the fiber to bind to them, and it helps to remove any excess levels. If you happen to suffer from PCOS, uterine fibroids, endometriosis, any sort of estrogen dominant conditions or estrogen excess conditions, I would say that a high fiber diet is an absolute must. It's your best friend on this healing journey. So there's the protein, there's making sure that you have a lot of fiber in your diet, and just watch the carbohydrates. Really watch your cravings. Your cravings will tell you a lot about your hormones and your menstrual cycle. So as you move into the ovulation stage, run about halfway through the cycle. And if you want a deeper breakdown of the cycle phases, have a listen to my other episode on the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. So imagine that you're at ovulation, halfway through the cycle, and then you're moving and shifting into more of a progesterone dominant phase of the menstrual cycle, the yang phase, the luteal phase, whatever you'd like to call it. This phase is when you don't really have a lot of that regulatory effect of estrogen, because estrogen's already peaked and is starting to decline. For some of us, it doesn't decline, it actually crashes. And that's when we get intense cravings. So when estrogen is falling, we have less ability to manage the sugar that we take in. And it means we have to be very careful about how much sugar we're eating in the second half of the cycle. Comment in the comment area, by the way, if you're one of those women who gets those sugar cravings in the luteal phase, because it's a challenge, isn't it? It's like the universe is sending you a challenge, telling you, this isn't good for you at this time of the cycle. So you're really going to have to fight and be very strong and hold your center and not give in to those sugar cravings. It could be that you have some issues with insulin. It could also be that you're very magnesium deficient. Magnesium is so important for us and for our hormonal health and for our nervous system health. So you want to get some good sources of magnesium in your diet. At the very least, get yourself a high-dose magnesium supplement and eat lots of fresh greens. Fresh greens like even dandelion leaf that has a lot of magnesium in it. Chamomile tea has a lot of magnesium in it. Any sorts of natural green veggies are going to give you some magnesium. So there's stress situations as well that will drift you into different subtypes of PMS. Have a look at the stress in your life and what happens around halfway through the cycle, and see whether your work stress, your family stress, maybe you just have a lot on socially. Maybe it's a health stress where you have a health condition and that's causing you a certain level of stress. All of these things will impact which type you develop. Now it is time to talk about the different PMS subtypes. So the very first type is known as PMS-A. PMS-A actually stands for, the way I like to think about it, PMS anxiety. So PMS-A is the very first subtype. It focuses on nervous system and mood and emotional changes that can occur in the lead up to the bleed. And this might be 2 weeks before the bleed. It might be a week before the bleed. So we don't really want to generalize too much about the timing of PMS because it's so variable with all women. But before the bleed, for whatever period of time it is, there is a distinct change in mood. And for many women, it will be a flat effect. So what I mean by that is normally we have a certain level of joy and vitality in our mood and our emotions. We can be very responsive. We can be very receptive with our friends and in our interactions. We can be vibrant, supportive. We can contribute to conversations and so on. But with PMSA, it's almost like you suddenly retreat into your inner shell and you can be even feeling less self-confident. You might be less likely to be social, to engage in conversations. And it's the way that you feel about yourself. It's not just what you're presenting to the world. It's actually how you're feeling about yourself. So a lot of those emotions can be quite internal. People don't really know what you're going through. It's more that it's happening on the inside. The other side of PMSA, and this is a very common one actually, is that level of premenstrual tension, which is normal for women, that level of tension can become more heightened. So it's starting to develop a holding pattern in the body that's a little bit uncomfortable and makes us a bit irritable. So you will notice this in your jaw. If you get a tight jaw just before the bleed or for a week or so before the bleed, this is a sign of PMSA, and it's just that tension in the body that doesn't quite know where to go. One of the very first things that I do with anybody who presents with PMSA is I get them onto magnesium. It's such a lovely, calming mineral. It really suits the tension in the body, helps to relax, and it's going to be very supportive for you. So there's the anxiety, there's the self-esteem issues, there's the flat effect, and there's the irritability. So what could you potentially be doing in your diet to support this? Number one, make sure you've got a really nice, calming herbal regimen. So this could be a cup of chamomile tea before bedtime. It could be something even a little bit stronger. My favorite herbs for sleep are things like hot cocoa with valerian root. I love herbs like shatavari, ashwagandha. They're very calming, but they're also strengthening your body, and they're very specific as women's herbs. Doesn't mean that men can't benefit from them, but they have always have a long tradition of supporting the female body and its particular hormonal and physiological makeup. I do really love lemon balm. Lemon balm is very calming, and there's lots of other herbs, but I'd probably just aim for some of those. So lemon balm, chamomile, valerian, or passion flower is very good too. Passion flower often gets combined with lemon balm and chamomile. It's a really nice combination. And then you've got some of those more luxurious herbs like ashwagandha and shatavari, and the other one was valerian, wasn't it? So they can often be cooked up together with some soy milk or the milk of your choice and some cacao, a little bit of honey or maple syrup if you like. PMSA is a really common type of PMS. It affects around 80% of PMS sufferers, and it's really easily triggered by a few things. So apart from knowing which herbs are going to be nice for you, it's probably worth knowing what are the triggers to PMSA and how can I reduce those triggers in my life. So number one is relationship. If you think about that premenstrual tension, it's going to be exacerbated by interactions in the family home. This could be with your partner, it could be with your family, it could be with your children. Very unlikely, but it could be with your doggy. So it's just in that home environment that the tension levels are just triggered a little bit all the time, and that can contribute to worsening anxiety, self-esteem, flat effect, and depression before the bleed. Sometimes it's work-related as well. If stress levels are very high at work, or if there is an unusual amount of pressure at work, then it's quite likely that PMSA will be exacerbated by this. When I'm working with women who have PMS type A, I will always get an assessment of their blood estrogen and their progesterone, but I don't stop there. I do those two because sometimes the progesterone can be low in relation to the estrogen. The other hormones that I like to look at are the waking cortisol levels. So this test is called CAR. It's the cortisol awakening response. It's a fantastic way to get a sense of what someone's stress levels are like when they first wake up in the morning. And then it's good also to test those cortisol levels through the day. So cortisol is your chronic stress hormone, and it's going to be an important and influential hormone in PMSA because PMSA has that nervous system link, and it is characterized by anxiety and mood changes. So stress and stress tolerance ability is what I'm trying to measure there as well. I think it's really important to look beyond hormones too. So lifestyle recommendations for PMSA are to meditate every day. So whether you're doing a breathing meditation or you're doing a chanting meditation, just have some calming ritual that you perform every day and make sure that you get enough sleep. Ideally, get to bed by 9:30 and give yourself half an hour or so to fall asleep. This could even be the time that you do a sleep meditation. If you haven't already, I highly recommend that you check out my heavy and warm autogenic training meditation. It's on YouTube. It's on Insight Timer. I think it's on my website as well. So if you search up heavy and warm autogenic training meditation, it takes you through the process of, I guess, persuading your body that you're already asleep. And the meditation goes for an hour. So you've got that whole hour to drift off to sleep while you're listening. It's a really fantastic way to unwind. I highly recommend it. And we want to just take some pressure off your stress management system. I'd love to talk more about this system with you in future episodes. We call it the HPA axis, and it's all about this network of communication and hormone regulation that occurs between the brain and various types of glands in your body, like the adrenals, the pituitary, the ovaries can sometimes be affected, the thyroid can be affected. So I'd really love to talk about that in future. But let's move on to the next type of PMS, which is type H. Now, H actually is sort of paraphrased as hyperhydration. So a lot of hydration in the body. And you guessed it, it's about fluid retention. So this is the one where you go up a clothing size before your period comes. That's how you know if you have this type. You could also get a little bit of swelling in the ankles, swelling in the wrists. It's quite common in the Ayurvedic kapha type. So if you've ever been diagnosed by an Ayurvedic physician, you've been told that you have strong kapha tendency in your body, or you develop more kapha traits before the bleed, then this is probably going to be you. And you may also have some breast swelling occurring here as well. So not necessarily breast pain, but swelling of the breasts, and you can just generally feel like you've gone up a clothing size overall. This is actually the second most common type of PMS. And what's driving it, what's sitting behind it, is the retention of water and salt in your body. So number one, if you have this type of PMS, look at your diet in the 2 weeks before the cycle and really keep an eye out for anything that's really salty. So if you've got salty crackers, salty crisps, if you're salting all of your food, this is the salt that's going to be building up in your body in the lead up to your next bleed. So if you don't want that building up, work with your diet and make sure that you take out any excess salt. Just cook with a small amount of salt, but definitely don't be shaking that salt shaker over everything. And the other thing that I highly recommend for this type of PMS, where you're retaining a lot of fluid, is to get yourself a dandelion plant. So you can go online, you can buy organic dandelion plants. I know that Byron Bay Herb Cottage has them. That's where I bought my dandelion. And, 10 or so years later, it is going so strong. And every season of the year, basically, it gives me lots of leaves to eat, particularly spring, summer, and autumn. So what I will do is I'll just sit on the balcony normally of an afternoon. I have my little cavoodle sweet pea next to me, and we're both nibbling on dandelion leaves. I don't know whether she does it because she sees me doing it or intuitively because she knows it's good for her. But when she sees me eating the dandelion leaves, she asks for some as well. So dandelion leaves are actually full of nutrition, and you won't just get the benefit of the potassium in the dandelion leaves that's going to help with your swelling. You'll also get a whole heap of vitamins. There are a couple of plants that I really recommend using as herbal multivitamins, And this is just for general health. It's not to fix a nutrient deficiency. That's a little bit more serious. But if you just want an idea of which plants to grow in your herb patch, number one, dandelion gives you heaps and heaps of water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins and minerals. And stinging nettle also gives you a lot of fat-soluble and water-soluble minerals and vitamins. So both of those plants are really fantastic for all of us, just to keep us healthy and keep our nutrient levels up. Women who experience PMSH will often have, as I said before, swollen feet, swollen ankles. Another thing that they can sometimes develop is a reduced threshold to pain. That's really interesting, isn't it? And there can just be this general sense of heaviness. So I've just talked about the fact that water's building up, that salt is building up, and, can we flush it out a little bit with some dandelion leaves? Absolutely. Green tea will do the same thing. It will help to flush out. Anything that works your kidneys will help you to flush out that water and that salt. But one more thing that you really want to think about is your kidney adrenal function. I will often assess this in the pulse when I'm doing pulse readings for all of my clients. There's a particular pulse level that can relate how the adrenals are going, how the kidneys are going, and how are the reservoirs of energy in the body, how is the resilience in the body. So with adrenal and kidney function, I would be thinking of that in more of this concept that the adrenals are your stress resilience, and they give you the energy to cope long term with our generally highly stressful lifestyles. And kidney function is a little bit more in that Eastern tradition where the kidney is the source of the vitality, life force, and energy. So I won't go too much into that. But you want to look at anything that gives you vitality and energy, increase that in your life in the 2 weeks before the cycle begins with the new bleed, and have a look at anything that depletes your life force. So you want to think quite critically about what you're doing on a daily basis that's giving you energy, and do more of those things. It could be a beach walk. It could be a cup of ashwagandha latte. It could be going to bed earlier, maybe just listening to certain types of music. There's so many ways that we can increase our life force, aren't there? And I'm sure that you are just bursting with ideas right now. So write them all down. They're the things that you want to do. It will take the pressure off your adrenals. Whatever you do to correct your hormones, by the way, doesn't just have to be an internal medicine. It can be the changes you make in your lifestyle, the spiritual and ritualistic practices that you have every day. It can be the time you spend with your loved ones. There's so many ways that we can impact positively our hormonal health. Diet's really important for PMS type H. So as I mentioned before, curb your salty foods. Watch out for the caffeine and the smoking. They're very dehydrating. Caffeine can be good to a degree sometimes, but it might stress your adrenals out, So there's one thing that you might be able to do, or just sort of reduce your caffeine intake or switch to something a little bit more nourishing in the 2 weeks before the bleed begins. Oh, I've got a good one for you now. PMS type C, and I like to think about C meaning cravings. So this is the PMS where we can develop particular cravings, normally sweet or salty. It just depends on the individual. You'll also notice that there's a general increase in appetite. So this is where the metabolic aspects of PMS come in. We're probably craving more sweets and craving more food in general because we're not really utilizing the food that we're already ingesting and turning that into really useful energy. So there could be some issues with thyroid function here and insulin function. Insulin is the hormone that helps your body utilize the food and liquids that you take in and convert those into energy, get them into the cells. I suppose it's a little bit more complex than that. I'm just really simplifying it there. But basically, if you have this type of PMS where you're developing really ravenous hunger in, say, the couple of weeks or the week before the bleed, it's very likely that you've got some issues with the way that your body is managing its carbohydrates and your food intake, which tells you immediately that you need more protein and you need the types of foods that are going to balance out the carbohydrate levels, and definitely switch to a low glycemic index, low GI diet. If you're not sure how to do that, you can head to your local supermarket or grocery store and have a look for in the health food section for low GI foods. Often they will be labeled in some way. You can even get low GI raw sugar to cook with. So there are lots of options for low GI, and perhaps it's something I can do an episode for you on in the future as well. Protein-wise, if you're not eating meat or not regularly eating meat or seafood, just have a look at foods like legumes, beans, lentils, other sources of protein. You just need something to give you a little bit more usable energy and to reduce the desire in your body for more energy all the time. Because the more energy your body feels that it needs, the more hungry it's going to make you. It's going to make you think that you need to keep eating. There's another thing here that might be happening, though. If you are a woman in your 40s, particularly mid to late 40s or beyond, and you're getting this type of PMS, the type C, where you get really hungry, but it's not just in the week or 2 weeks before the bleed, it's the whole cycle. This also relates to some of the symptoms of perimenopause. So that's a little bit different. Perimenopause similarly has some issues with metabolism, insulin function, blood glucose levels, and so on. So PMS type C, it's characterized by food cravings. They could be sweet, they could be salty. So let's go to sweet first. Is this you? I wonder if this is you. This is definitely me, by the way. So I have a very long history of a sweet tooth. And that's why a lot of recipes on my website blog are they're naturally sweet, but they're for the, sweeter taste. I've been trying really, really hard to put more savory recipes up. But sweet, I will often ask my clients which way they would go. So would, for instance, you choose a chocolate or would you choose a piece of cake? And I'm just trying to work out whether there's a particular deficiency at play. And, if you answered that question as a chocolate, chocolate was your weak point for the week before the bleed or maybe the night before the bleed, you're just eating half the bar and you don't know why and who are you? So if that's you, it's very likely to be a deficiency in a neurotransmitter called phenylethylamine. It can be other things, of course. Chocolate, has a whole lot of beautiful stuff in it, but it's very rich in this phenylethylamine or PEA. So it's quite likely you've got a bit of a deficiency there. And it could also be deficiency in magnesium, which is, again, very rich in chocolate, particularly when you get to more of the healthier, darker chocolates, the 70% cacao sort of level. So magnesium levels need to be addressed, and nervous system and stress need to be addressed in PMS type C. But you can also get headaches and fatigue. Now, that's not necessarily just a general sort of thing for PMS type C. It's quite specific. It's because of the sugar intake. So when the sugar intake increases, it creates a whole lot of symptoms that you otherwise wouldn't get. We are designed to become a little bit more hungry before the cycle. That is completely normal. We're just not designed to be eating the types of foods that we eat today, and certainly not in the amounts that we eat them. So we get these headaches and migraines and fatigue as a direct result of what we're eating. If it's not just the sugar, it's going to be some intolerance that's occurring as well, possibly some microbiome and bowel issues too. So the types of foods that you'll be craving, let's have a look at those. Most women will be craving refined carbohydrates. So this could be bread, pasta, gnocchi. It's just foods that are quite a little bit sweet, but also they don't totally fill you. You can eat a lot of them before you feel really full, but they're not really giving you great energy. So it's a vicious cycle. The type of foods that we end up craving and wanting to eat are not the foods that are going to give us the sustenance that we need to get to a really healthy bleed. So ideally what we should be eating is a little bit of protein at each meal. It could be 40 to 50% of the plate. And we want to be eating a lot of vegetables with lots of fiber in them as well, so that our bowels move easily and we don't get any blockage or we don't get anything building up, any fecal matter building up before the bleed, because that in itself can cause a lot of pain. And we want to have lots of fluid and hydration. We also want to be taking our nutrients, our supplements, and so on. I could show you my supplement drawer. You might fall over. It's insane. But I have a lot of supplements because I'm constantly giving myself lots of extra nutrition, partly because I know that I'm a bit of a stress head and I burn through things pretty quickly. I also know that I'll sort of need certain things at different times of the month and so on. So you'll be looking at those refined carbs. You'll also be looking at sweets, lollies, chocolates, as I mentioned before, is a big one, cakes and so on, pastries. Those sorts of foods suddenly become really enticing. So look out for those sorts of cravings and see if you can start to transition to making healthy choices. Rather than eating those sorts of foods, you might make sure that you've got heaps and heaps of fruit in the house so that you've got something sweet there, but it's, say, an orange, which gives you lots of vitamin C, lots of fiber, and lots of antioxidants. So you just got some other options there. You could be making really delicious smoothies using all of your frozen fruit, for instance, a little bit of coconut yogurt, adding some fresh rocket into that, really delicious in smoothies. Well, I suppose I should say that the smoothies makes it delicious. You'll also notice that if you have PMS type C, you might feel dizzy or you might get hangry. So this is like irritability if you skip a meal. Sometimes, as I mentioned before, you might get migraines. So this is where it's getting more of a chronic condition. So it's not just relating to the cycle, but in the background, you probably do have a high carbohydrate diet and could do a little bit of work to improve that. I know that PMSC, it's probably one that I see a lot in my PMS clients. So I'll look for things like the weight changes around the cycle, the increased appetite, the particular types of food cravings, and then I start determining what might be going on in the background. Is it issues with sugar regulation? Are they possibly pre-diabetic? It's not always the case. I don't want to scare you, but I always am screening for every possibility. Could it be candidiasis or candida? Could it be the magnesium deficiency, PEA, those sorts of things? And in terms of the symptoms that I look for, it's headaches particularly and irritability that I will look for. So that irritability and nervous tension is not just in the domain of PMS-A. PMS anxiety also occurs in PMS-C. And I'll look for shakiness and just people who feel like they get really unsteady if they miss meals. Sometimes I'll run some pathology tests. I can look at insulin levels. I can also look at cortisol. I can look at magnesium levels. So there's lots of tests that we can do to determine what might be behind PMS type C. And moving on, PMS type D, this is all about low mood. PMS type D stands for depression. It's more of a depressive type of PMS. This term depression, I'm not entirely sure, whether we have the same sort of conception of it. So the way that I think about it is it's a lack of emotional effect. It's like a flatness. So it's not necessarily feeling weepy and crying all the time and feeling despondent about life. It's having difficulty even feeling about life or feeling about someone. I remember when my mother passed away, my father's passed away as well. These are huge, huge moments of grief in our lifetimes. And for those, few months after my parents passed, I was more irritable than usual. I was less likely to really feel happy for my partner, for instance, if things were going well for him. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be. It was just that just the grief, I think, the grief effect, it really changed my emotional effect. And I became quite flat, much less motivated about my work and my purpose in life. So PMSD can have this sense that everything's just a little bit flat and it's losing its color. Your world can feel a little bit monotonal for a while. It shouldn't be the whole cycle. It should just be for a period of time before the bleed comes. So maybe 2 to 5 days at the most. Usually it's just a day or so for most of us. But it's really tough. It's the least common type, which is good to know, but it can be really tough. And it can deepen and worsen into a condition known as PMDD. So this is dysphoric disorder, which is attached to PM for premenstrual. So premenstrual dysphoric disorder. This is a much more serious level of depression. It includes some withdrawal, has very specific symptoms, and the severity level is different to what you'd normally expect with PMS type D. Because with PMS type D, we go on with our normal daily lives, we get through our days, we just feel like a different person while we're doing it. But with PMDD, it's hugely interferes with our ability to function on a daily basis. So it needs medical attention, it needs monitored attention as well. I will often look in PMSD at neurochemistry. I'm a huge fan of working with neurochemistry, and we've got neurochemicals in our body that pulse and move around. They interact with our brain. They tell us, how to perceive things, what's happening in our world, how to interpret that data that we're receiving from what we see, what we hear, and so on. And so these neurochemicals are things like dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. I love seeing the beneficial effects that we can achieve by using herbs and also specific nutritional supplements to help people to boost their neurochemical levels. This is a wonderful thing to do if you do happen to suffer from PMS type D. And I would suggest that if this is you and you want something to do today, go and get yourself some forms of protein snacks, because all of these neurochemicals are built from the amino acids you get from protein. So eat a little bit of salmon, a little bit of fish, go and get some sushi, go and get yourself some nuts, whatever's suitable for you, some seeds. I particularly love pepita and sunflower seeds, and start proteining up your diet. Even think about getting yourself a protein shake. I'll also look at estrogen, progesterone, sometimes androgens in PMS type D. So there's lots of investigations we can do there as well. And finally, PMS type P. So P stands for pain. This is the uncomfortable, painful type of PMS. Not every woman will get this. There'll be a certain level of tension, as I mentioned before, and also a certain level of distension. So you'll just generally feel heavier before a bleed. But with PMS type P, you might be sitting there with the hot pack on your belly because it's that uncomfortable. You might not be able to go to work. You might be taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like Nurofen, medicines that are trying to reduce inflammatory processes that are going on and driving this process. So I want to emphasize that PMS type P, unlike many of the others, is really not just a hormonal condition. There might be some hormones involved. For example, estrogen and progesterone help us to manage pain. And we know that by the time we get to the end of the cycle, estrogen and progesterone, they have tuned out. So there could be some level of that hormone involvement, but it's more of an elevated inflammatory prostaglandin state. And there are lots of these prostaglandins in our bodies, lots of different types. Some of them will trigger the release in your body of more inflammatory style chemicals. Others will work against that. But if you've got the type that are triggering those inflammatory chemicals, then you're more likely to have a stronger spasm in your uterus as it's getting ready to shed its lining. PMS type P can also get some nausea, some vomiting, especially if it's becoming really severe. The treatment for PMS type P needs to be an anti-inflammatory protocol. So jump on my website if this is you. I've got an anti-inflammatory diet protocol on my homepage, right down the bottom in the resources section. Have a look at it, see how you can start tailoring your diet to look a little bit more like an anti-inflammatory diet. But I do suggest that you see me or you see someone like me, because we can work absolute wonders with nutritional supplements and herbs. Really, really big nutrient deficiency in PMS pain type is magnesium. So we can get you straight onto a high dose magnesium. Make sure you're taking it at the right time and combining it with herbs that help to reduce spasm. I really believe that we think about the pain as happening all below because we're feeling all the cramping in our lower abdomen usually. But I do really feel like this is a uterine issue. It's the uterine muscles that are so strong. They're so strong, they're designed to carry babies. So that's how strong those muscles are. And if you can imagine before the bleed, those muscles are contorting and they're churning away and they're thinking, got to remove this lining, we've got to shed soon. Let's start pulling together. And so you get all these muscles in this sort of like a crisscross fashion, kind of like a basket weave. And you can just imagine as they're pushing against each other and pulling apart and trying to get blood moving through. So I really think that the uterine health is a key player in PMS type P, and I will always work on improving the blood circulation through the uterus, warming up the uterus, making sure it doesn't get too cold during the cycle, making sure that the diet isn't too cold and dry, and really nourishing the uterus so that when it comes time for the bleed, that lining is much more easy to shed. There are a certain number of risk factors for PMS, so I think that I should talk about these with you maybe in a future episode. But for now, I hope that you've got some useful information about this, perhaps even come a little bit closer to identifying which subtype or which subtypes of PMS you might have. Stay in touch. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. I would love for your little ears to be listening to my future episodes. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and all the best on your hormone journey. Hey everybody, please note that the information, opinion and advice provided in this podcast are not intended to replace professional medical care. They are for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not always be those of the host. Thanks for listening.